Well, is this a good time to start?
Absolutely, Will.
Well, good evening to everybody. I see some familiar faces here and welcome into our chat. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Will Tieman, part of the Spartan Network announcing crew, and I'm here with Athletic Director Bill Beekman. And the gist of this is for a chance for everybody to have a kind of a private, open conversation about where we are with what's going on around us and ask Bill questions. And it was pretty interesting when we started talking about this is the guys, those of you who know me know I'm kind of a coat and tie fellow. And we were discussing before we hit the button, and it's been 8 weeks since they canceled the Big Ten tournament, which reminded me, up until today, this is the first time I've had a sport jacket on in 8 weeks, because I had a sport jacket on the day we were getting ready to go to Indy. So it's hard to believe it's been 2 months, and obviously it's like it just happened yesterday. It was so surprising. But anyway, welcome in our athletic director, Bill Beekman. Bill, I assume you're there somewhere.
I'm here. It's great to see so many familiar faces, and that's one of the I guess one of the things that's been such a struggle is not seeing everybody. So these things are just great fun.
Well, the gist of this, Bill, is really to let people ask you questions, and we'll tell some stories along the way and get some reminiscence. But I'll start off with a flashback I've had, and it's interesting to think how fast our situation happened. Imagine this: we're getting ready to go to Indianapolis for the tournament, and two things stand out. Before I went over to watch our practice that morning, and by the way, we had a great practice. I was trying to figure out how you would do a game with nobody in the stands. And our women's basketball announcer does minor league baseball as well. And I'm talking to him about what's the best way to approach a great three-point shot when there's nobody there. And he said, I can help you. I do a lot of games where there's nobody there, meaning minor league baseball. But think about this, we're loading a bus. The bus is loaded, we're getting ready to go. And the next thing you know, the bus is unloaded. And we're just all kind of sitting there. And then by 4:30 that day, Tom calls a team meeting and the whole season's over. So we went from, we're gonna play in front of nobody to we're not gonna play again for the rest of the season. And the shock of the people in the basketball office and the heartbreak was unbelievable. And to this day, I still can't believe it ended that way. But the good news is we did win a third straight championship. The last game we did play was a victory, and that was pretty cool. We hung a banner, and we did have our banquet to celebrate the great accomplishments of the senior class. And I'm sure all of us will remember where we were when we realized that something we just really enjoy so much and hold dear to our hearts was something we'll never have. And so with that, anybody that has a question for Bill, hop in. So who wants to be the first to ask a question?
I'll ask a question.
All right.
I'm curious, as a nurse and someone who works for the med school in Grand Rapids, how we might envision 70,000 people gathering in Spartan Stadium the first weekend of September, and even before that, how 110 student athletes would be able to start practicing together to play football in July or August.
Well, that's a great question. Those that among those folks that submitted questions as part of the registration process, I think the number one question was something to the effect of, will we play football, and if so, when? And then the second question was, and if we will I be able to be there? Or will we have fans in the stands, or something to that effect? So let me take a little bit of time and walk through what I know at this point, starting by saying that there's a lot I don't know. But the Big Ten athletic directors have been meeting on a daily basis every weekday for about an hour and a half for the last the last 6 or 7 weeks, and trying to sort through every imaginable permutation that we can think of. We've also engaged a leader, a health leader on our campus. I guess I'll put it that way. In our case, our Michigan State rep to the group is Dr. Tony Avellino, who's our head of sports medicine and assistant provost. So Dr. Avellino is part of the team for Michigan State, along with myself, and then we meet with the head football coaches once a week. So spending a lot of time on it. I think in terms of how we start practice, we've worked with the head football coaches, and we believe that the student athletes for football, and I'll focus on football, although much of this is translatable to other sports, at least at some level. We think that we could have our student athletes ready to play if we had them in East Lansing for 6 weeks, from initial meetings to some two-a-days to the regular sort of practice schedule that we had. Usually they come back and have 5 weeks before the first game. We probably need about 6 weeks. If we could get 7, that'd be great. So we're hopeful that we can get that much lead time. We think we could possibly do it in as little as 4, although we'd prefer 6 or 7. In terms of playing, I think that one of the questions is, where will we be in several months with testing? And will we be in a place where we can, the goal would be that when everybody comes into the athletic training room to get their ankles taped, we do a swab of the inside of their cheek, we plug it into a machine, and 10 minutes later, we know if everybody's good to go. And those that aren't, we deal with accordingly. At some level, I think our coaches and ancillary personnel are probably more at risk than our players, who are, for the most part, amongst the healthiest people that imaginable. But nevertheless, we want to, if we have the ability to test everybody, I think it becomes a much more straightforward question. If we had the ability to do that regularly, we can't be taking tests away from hospitals and nursing homes and other areas that have great need. But if they are, freely available, readily available, without any concerns about scarcity, then I think with significant testing and monitoring, we could get people practicing and potentially playing. It depends a lot on, right now the Big Ten is has a sort of an order where nobody is allowed to have teams congregating or any group activity in person through at least June 1st. That well may be extended. It's sort of as Dr. Fauci has now famously said, the virus sets the timeline. And so I think we're all sort of trying to figure out how we react to things as they evolve. When we talk about it as a conference, we span from Lincoln, Nebraska, all the way into New Jersey and Rutgers University. And so certainly it's possible, well, it's actually probably likely that some schools will be ready to go before others. It's imaginable that Lincoln, Nebraska, and University of Iowa will be ready to go before Rutgers sitting there in the shadow of New York City. And one can imagine us being somewhere in the middle of that. So it'll be we're monitoring when things open, how that goes, whether testing's available, when we believe we can bring students back to campus safely. Working through all those issues, and then depending on when that is, what does that mean for a schedule? And there we've looked at, obviously everybody's first choice is to start right on September 5th with that game against Northwestern for us, but we've looked at the possibility of really almost every permutation you can reasonably imagine. What would happen if we had to start 2 or 3 weeks later? We could potentially eliminate a bye week, play a week or two later into December before we hit up with final exam week, and then still have the Big Ten championship game at the same time. Other options would be going to a Big Ten only schedule. Now, there are financial implications with that because we all have contracts with the teams that we're playing the non-conference games, but playing a Big Ten schedule. Our Big Ten schedule is currently 9 games, so half of the conference would play 4 home, and the other half would play 5 at home. So do you add a 10th game to square that up? From my perspective, at least, and I think your reasonable minds can differ on this, but probably the worst case scenario, but a scenario that is possible, would be to play football in the spring. And assuming that the NFL stays relatively close to their schedule, do you play an abbreviated schedule that starts the week after the Super Bowl or 2 weeks after the Super Bowl? And of course, for schools like us in the North, that would mean that you'd be starting in February. So then you sort of, all these dominoes sort of fall, as you can imagine. Then do you think about the possibility of playing some number of games in the indoor stadiums that are in the Midwest? So you've got obviously a Ford Field and Lucas Oil down in Indianapolis. You've got an indoor stadium in Minneapolis, and so do you think about trying to be coordinated so that the folks that are available or that are allowed to get into the stadium aren't sitting there in 10-degree weather? So a lot has gone into it. Unfortunately, we're not at a point where we can pick one of those and say this is what we're going to do, but that hopefully gives you a flavor for some of the kinds of things we've been talking about. One last thing, in terms of fans in the stands, we have been working with a couple national firms. MSU has been working with them as well as through the Big Ten, and modeling how many people you could fit into a section or a bowl and still maintain reasonable social distancing. So if you've got a family or a group of 2, and then 6 foot apart, a group of 4 or 6, and then 6 foot apart, another group, and so on, and spacing them out so that you have people not sitting in front of or behind each other in the same row, and putting only 2 groups in a single row so that each group could go to the nearest aisle and not have to cross each other to get out of an aisle, all those kinds of things. And we believe that we could, rough estimates, put between 20 and 25% of a normal capacity crowd into the stadium with that kind of social distancing. We've talked about how we would admit people to the stadium. Do you have a timed entrance depending on a section or row to try and get people so that there's a little more separation? How do we park people as they come in? Do we prohibit or allow tailgating? All those kinds of questions that we've been exploring, so that however this shakes out, whatever happens, we're ready for it. Part of the frustration is I think we've planned probably 30 or 40 different scenarios across all these things, and only 1 or 2 of them are actually going to come to pass. But we want to be ready for whatever option we're confronted with. So that's kind of a big picture view of it.
Bill, let me ask you this before we get our next question. If we go to that spring football scenario, what about postseason play? Are we down to just the playoffs and that's it? And league championship games?
For football?
Yeah, if we go into that spring schedule after the Super Bowl, let's say. Yeah,
and I think we're still trying to sort all that out. I mean, obviously, the Rose Bowl is a good example because the Tournament of Roses and the Rose Parade, the bowl is only one small aspect of a huge ceremony that culminates with that game on January 1st. And so it would seem impractical or unusual, although these are unusual times, to play at any time other than January 1st. but those are all at issue. You could imagine a scenario where we start the season with bowl games rather than end the season with bowl games, and then we have a playoff at the end as we would traditionally. Or do you have the ability to kick those bowl games back? And of course, you've got extraordinary numbers of logistical issues with each game. Even simple things like when is the stadium available for use, depending on where it is. So those are layers of things that I don't think at this point we have clear answers to. We're as far as the Big Ten, we're still trying to make sure that we've sorted out how we're going to play a regular season, if that's at all possible, with the making sure that everybody involved is going to be safe and healthy. And as I was on a call with our deans and vice presidents earlier today, and our chief medical officer for the university, Dave Weissmantle, was saying, it was talking about how you measure risk, and Dave's comment was, well, we could all hide out in our basements for the next 3 years and none of us would get anything. But at some level, we've got to figure out what that balance is. And with the availability of protective gear, including masks, and the availability of testing, how do you balance beginning to bring students back to campus when you put people in the residence halls, when you begin to play sports and encourage fans to come on campus? All those are balancing acts that we're really, I, as an athletic director, am pretty much completely unqualified to assess the medical aspects of that. So we're really relying on our physician leaders that are helping us sort that out.
Well, Deb, that's a heck of an answer for a short question. So anyway, appreciate that. So who else would like to jump in and ask Bill a question?
I'll ask a question, Will. It's Steve Schenker speaking. And thanks for doing this, by the way. Obviously, we all want to get back to campus and get in Spartan Stadium and watch games and so on. But if the alternative were to do games with just the players and the staffs and no fans in the stands, what's the calculus? In other words, what does what does game day add to the coffers of the university, particularly the athletic department, versus TV revenue and the other sources of revenue? Like, how impactful is that?
Yeah, that's thanks, Steve. And that also allows me to answer a question that, or a subset of the last question that I hadn't thought of. So in terms of the athletic department budget, the Michigan State Athletic Department budget is about $140 million. And to put that in some perspective, the largest budget in the conference is a little over $200 million at Ohio State. And then there are a number of schools that are surrounding about $100 million on the other end of the spectrum: Maryland, Rutgers, Indiana, Illinois. So we're 140. Ohio State at about 205, and then behind them, Michigan at about 190, Penn State maybe in the 160 ballpark. And then there are several schools with us at that about 140 range. Wisconsin would be a good example. So of that $140 million budget, and just talking in round numbers, because I don't have my spreadsheet pulled up in front of me, but round numbers, about 50 of that 140 comes from television revenue. And of the 50 that comes from television revenue, the vast majority of that is football. Probably for MSU, a greater percentage of it is basketball than any other Big Ten school, because we're just better more regularly at basketball and folks like to watch us. But most of that is football. So say for us, maybe it's about 40. The next greatest revenue line in our budget is ticket sales. Ticket sales are at about 25 million. And of that 25, depending on the year, between 17 and 19 typically comes from football. In years where Michigan and Ohio State are home games, you get closer to the 19. In years where maybe people are a little less enthusiastic about the schedule, maybe you're a little closer to the 17, but in that range. And then in addition to that 25, and those ticket sales, that 17 or 19 is talking about ticket sales in the bowl. So so then you add on to that probably another, oh God, I'm trying to remember the number, probably 10, 12 million that would be sales that are accounted for, probably closer to 12 in the sideline seats, the chairbacks that are right up front, and the Huntington Club on the 4th floor, and then the 7th floor suites. So those would probably add about another 12 million to the mix. So if you play football without people in the stands, without anybody in the stands, then we would lose over the course of a season, say 18 plus 12 is 30, probably a little more than 30 million just in raw ticket sales and seat premiums, and then we would have other things that would be reduced in a far less significant capacity, negligible, or not as much revenue generated through programs, through concessions, through you probably lose some money in our licensing, because if there's nobody in the stands, then there's nobody to see the commercial. So the commercials we run on the scoreboards and all those things, businesses would be less enthusiastic about giving us their money for those. So all in, if we don't play football, it's a fairly cataclysmic issue. If we play without fans in the stands, it's still probably somewhere in the neighborhood of a $30 million ballpark difference. And so the other side of that question that I wanted to make sure I covered, that several folks had asked, if we don't play, then we would offer refunds of ticket sales and seat premiums to folks that but because we weren't actually letting them use their ticket. We'd of course gratefully accept those as donations to the Spartan Fund, but we would certainly offer them back to folks.
Bill, before we get more questions, one thing I wanted to ask you about, we did have a great year in 2000. We talked about raising the banner in basketball as our last game of the season, but we had some other really magic moments. Maybe we talk about that just a touch.
Yeah, well, thanks, Will. We did have some great moments, and obviously everybody everybody knows basketball, and particularly men's basketball, and Tom had another extraordinary season, and despite so much adversity with the death of Cassius's brother, but to end the season with the birth of Xavier's son, and then finish strong. And I think anybody that thought 10 weeks with 10 weeks left to go, 8 weeks left to go in the season, that we were going to be raising a banner, boy, you're sure a better prognosticator than I was, because it didn't feel that way. And everything came together. We got a little help, but everything came together. The team finished so incredibly strong, and so it really was pretty special. And so that was great fun. But one of the things I'd like to focus on is that we had some really great success in some of our other sports. And we had cross country is one of those quiet sports, but Walt Drenth, our head coach, does such an extraordinary job. And so we're our women's team was Big Ten champions and did so well, and I think finished nationally in I want to say 6th or 7th place. There was an Arkansas team that was incredible, but they did very, very well. And our women's golf team that never really got a chance to play was poised to win a Big Ten championship. They were absolutely loaded this year with led by Allie Gear Park, who would have been hopefully this summer able to play in her second women's amateur down at Augusta. And happily she had that opportunity last year because it wasn't available this year. But one other team I'd focus on real quick, or maybe give a plug to gymnastics, which improved incredibly this year, just incredibly, and won several matches against teams that they would have lost to in prior years. But wrestling, to be honest, and I've shared this with Coach Chandler, so I'm not talking behind his back, but I don't think I'd been to a wrestling meet before I became athletic director, but those young men really had an extraordinary season. They beat a number 3 ranked Wisconsin team. They had, I think, 4 or 5 of the men were ranked nationally, with Cam Caffrey ranked as high as I want to say 7th or 8th in the country. And so to have that many of their team, you wrestle 10 guys, to have half of your guys ranked nationally in the top 20, 25 is really an accomplishment to Roger and what he's been able to accomplish in a very short number of years. So I think as you're seeing a lot of success maybe in places where we haven't normally found it, and we're working really, really hard to try and support those programs that maybe haven't gotten a lot of love over the years, but not doing anything less in football or men's basketball, but seeing some real growth. And well, Will, before I let you get the mic back, I'll make one other plug, and that's ice hockey. Danton has done just a tremendous job.
Yeah.
And there was a newspaper article about halfway through the season in the sports section of the State Journal, where the headline was Michigan State splits weekend, falls from first place. And I thought, oh my goodness, that just warms my heart. When does falling from first place warm your heart? But I think we'd finished last in the conference the last 3 years. And yet Danton's team, you could see steady progress, steady growth, and it just wasn't sort of showing up in the numbers. But you could see the team getting better if you were at the games. And this year, all that really sort of caught fire, and you could see the crowds grow. In the Michigan game, we had a tremendous crowd, and there was, in the middle of the season, we were as high as first place for a number of weeks, second place. And we struggled in a couple of the weekends at the end. The team, the team got sick. There were a number of kids with the flu, and although we never really talked about that, there were a number of weekends where the kids were just not all that healthy and struggled. But we're reloading, and so I feel bad tonight if we got off the call and I'd forgotten to mention ice hockey and the progress they've made. So I think you'll see a lot of progress. We're excited to see Mel and the football team get on the field. A huge sense of energy and excitement there. And basketball recruiting is going well. Susie had a lot of injury, but they'll be back. So I think whenever we're healthy and whenever we can get the student athletes back to campus, I think it could be very exciting times at MSU this year.
Bill, do you want to touch on the academics just for a second? That's kind of a part of this too.
Yeah, so that's actually a very timely question. When pretty much every sort of alumni club or Rotary or Kiwanis club or wherever I'm asked to speak, I sort of always start with the same stump speech, which is that we're really focused on being a student-centered organization, health, safety, and wellness of our student athletes. But then I talk about success on the field of play, in the classroom, and making sure we're setting up our students to be successful in life. And so we'll be judged on the first one by the media and the press and so on. But the second two are really the most critical, when we think about, are we a successful organization and how we're shepherding young people through the university. And so academics is obviously a critical piece of that. And I got from Todd Edwards, the director of our student athlete support services today, an email that we had the highest cumulative grade point for the athletic department since we've been recording that number this year. And so very, very exciting news for our student athletes. When I looked at the detail, there were, of our 25 programs, 19 of those 25 programs had average GPAs for our students. The students' average GPA was over a 3.0 for 19 of our 25 programs. And the 6 where the average GPA was below a 3 point, it was awfully close. And those programs continue to improve every year. And this year, students across the university are able to, because of the online nature of the classes and the tumultuous circumstances of the last several months, students are able to select for any class at their choice if they want that essentially to be a pass-fail or a credit, no credit option. The calculations I'm talking about were before any of that was plugged in. So those are the true grades that our students received this semester. And when you look at some of our sports, our swimming and diving teams, both men and women, women's golf, men's tennis, you're looking at GPAs that are averaging 3.7, 3.8 across all students for those sports. So I just couldn't be happier with the success of our students academically. Our student athlete support services team at the Smith Center does absolutely incredible work, and they've been working in just crazy hours over tools like this, over Zoom and other things, to work with our students who had been in classes up until a week ago. So a huge sort of shout out to them for their success.
Okay, so well, we've had Deb and we've had Steve. Any other questions here? Go ahead, Chuck.
Question, Will.
Oops. Well, how you doing, Jill?
I'm good, Will. How are you?
I'm good. Talking to you, that's a good thing.
My question, we heard yesterday that Iowa is going to start football practice on June 1st. And I know, the Big Ten is saying nothing's going to happen until then. But if they start on June 1st, does that mean everybody starts, or can they do it, independently in that? Or does everybody have to start at the same time?
Great question, Jill.
I have another addition to that. Is there a drop dead date that, okay, if we don't know by July, whatever, August, whatever, that there will be no stands, people in the stands, or that? I know things change regularly, but there has to be some kind of a deadline where a decision is made.
Okay, let me tackle the second question while it's top of mind, and then I'll get back to Iowa. In terms of whether we play football this year in 2020, and whether we have fans in the stands, I think those are two independent questions. And while I'm sure there is a deadline, I don't. Things are so fluid. It's just hard to. We haven't talked about a deadline. We haven't pegged a date. I think if we, optimally, if we could start practice July 15th, then we could presumably play the opening game on September 5th. We'd have a solid 6 weeks of practice. If you creep to August 1st, can we do it in 4 weeks? We'd probably have conversations with medical staff about what that would look like. And you start getting beyond August 1st, then I think you start pushing the schedule back and going to modified versions of schedules. And yet I'm a little nervous to say these things publicly, because none of this is concrete. It's all sort of moving, and these are Bill's sort of suppositions. As we really haven't gotten to that point in terms of when the drop dead dates will fall, based on what kind of a season we're able to, what kind of a schedule we're able to construct. So that's I'm sure a somewhat unfulfilling answer, but just in terms of the flexibility and the day-to-day developments in terms of how things go across the country and in our individual Big Ten states, and the development and the access to new tests and different kind of tests, and tests that are quicker and that are have higher degrees of precision. So it's all sort of a big moving target. as it relates to Iowa playing football or practicing January 1st, I would say or June 1st, I'm sorry. If the Big Ten doesn't extend its sort of a stay-at-home order for athletes, if athletes are allowed to come to universities and practice, then what you would probably see initially are teams that would go into their standard off-season 8-hour weeks. So, most of our teams, when they're in their off-season period, they have the ability to practice have in-person contact with their coaches about 8 hours a week. And so if Iowa were to come back June 1st, they'd be in their 8-hour-a-week mode until it was agreed upon that teams could actually start the scheduled football practice. And at some level, there's also the NCAA regulates the first day of practice based on how many days out you are from your first game. So they could go into 8-hour-a-week mode and have some weight training, some in-person contact, but not really a practice or preseason practice as you'd think of it. And and I think that does that does sort of lead to the question. Yeah, I think it's very likely that some schools will be able to do more faster than others. And Iowa and Nebraska, I think, are more ready to start than most others, or at least they think they are. New Jersey is still struggling a bit. And then there are places that are, as I said earlier, that are points in between. In Michigan, our numbers have been dropping, and then yet in Ingham County, we had a higher number of COVID illnesses reported today. So it seems maybe like it's more plateauing than dropping. So I think that we've got to be within NCAA regulations for that first day of practice. Different schools may come back at different times and fall into that off-season 8-hour mode. And that's not just football. That could be for other sports as well.
Well, Bill, let me ask you this. You're dealing with 800 student athletes, and they're spread all over the place. So what kind of support do you have for these folks?
So up until the last week, they had extensive academic support. And all the services, or at least almost all of the services that we would provide in the Smith Center, we've been providing remotely via Zoom and other technology to student athletes that were still engaged actively in classes. We are not allowed under NCAA rules to monitor any practice or to monitor workouts. So you can't, a student athlete can't put their phone on and have video that a coach or a trainer or a strength and conditioning coach can view at this point. So what we've done is we've sent out workout routines to the athletes, and those workout routines at some level depend on what resources are available to them. Some kids have big home gyms that they can with weights and other things, and if you've seen some of the footage on Twitter and other things, we had a football player. It looked like he had a telephone pole he was carrying with tires on either side, and people have found creative ways to exercise. So we've been providing workouts for the student athletes. We've been having regular check-ins. They are able to communicate like this some number of hours a week, and so for football, for example, Mel has been meeting, I think 3 days a week. I think they're now up to 4 days a week, having about 1 hour meetings so that they can go through the playbook and the schemes and try and get the team ready. I think that those sessions are more guided by the attention span of the average 20-year-old than they are by technical time limits. But so a lot of communication over technology, but we're relying on the student athletes to work out on their own as best they can. And as we'll start summer session, then we'll be back in with academic support as well. So trying to make sure that they're as engaged as they can be. If student athletes and coaches are really type A people, They don't deal with idleness very well. I see Jill probably experiences the same thing I do. I think I see Tom Izzo on his bike riding around our neighborhood on an almost daily basis. So he's trying to burn off energy on his bike, sometimes with Loopy, but they don't deal with idleness well. So we're trying to create constructive ways to keep everybody busy.
But it's interesting to see everybody's backdrop. Where I'm sitting, if you look over one shoulder, you see our logo, and that's Sean Respert over my other shoulder. And this is our studio. This is our main studio at the Spartan Network. So I don't know how Respert got in here today, but he just walked in, so there he is. So
and you're
next question.
Social distancing, Will. He's at least 6 foot away there.
That's right. He is. I'm safe. I'm safe, Bill. So anyway, next question. Go ahead, Chuck.
You have to unmute.
Gotcha. We got you, Chuck.
Tim. Kind of carrying on with the same questions, and incidentally, Bill, just want to tell you, I think you're doing a great job. I can't picture us having a better person to handle us through a crisis like this. So I just want to thank you and say keep up the good work. On the question front, you've addressed the practices, and it appears that some teams might have 5 weeks of practice and some might have 7 going into the season. There's a couple of the key factors, and I wondered if you could just comment on. One is will teams play if there are not students in seats? In other words, Mitch Daniels has said Purdue is going to be in the seats. You know, Indiana's kind of said that. Iowa and Nebraska obviously have. Will there? So one variable is, will there be students there? A second variable, will there be fans there? A third variable is, as I compare the states that are out in front with, some states kind of in the middle, and potentially Rutgers not looking at games maybe until 2021, or maybe even Northwestern for that matter. But could the conference go on if you only had 10 or 11 or 13 schools playing football?
So first question about students in the seats. I think it's probably unwise to make any hard and fast statement. I think the last 8 weeks have shown us that we're a little bit in never say never mode in terms of what happens and what we can anticipate and how we react to it. So I wouldn't make any firm statement on that, but I think fundamentally agree with the idea that I think it's very important that if we're going to play, if we're putting students on the field, then there ought to be an opportunity for students to be in the stands. One without the other seems incongruous. So I think that's philosophically the right direction, with the sort of caveat that I'd never say never. But our first priority is health, safety, and wellness for the people associated with the game. Our second priority is getting folks into the stands so that we can recreate that sense of community that I think we at this point really desperately need. And so that means having our young people that are students in addition to student athletes have the access to the experience. In terms of some teams playing, other teams not playing, some teams getting more practice than others. Pat Hobbs is the athletic director at Rutgers, and Rutgers and Michigan State are the 2 teams this year in the Big Ten that have new head football coaches. So we're excited that our current Big Ten commissioner, Kevin Warren, is a former executive with the Minnesota Vikings, because in the NFL, when a new coach comes on board, the team gets a little extra practice, something that isn't an NCAA policy, but is an NFL policy. So we've been appealing to Kevin's NFL connections that he needs to remember the two schools that have new football coaches, new staffs, new schemes, new strength and conditioning coaches, and so on and so on. And unfortunately, or at least unfortunately for Michigan State, in the springs, there were some schools that got in, I think, as many as 8 spring practices, 8 days of practice, and we hadn't started spring practice yet. So there are some schools that are 8 days ahead of us out of the gate so far. So we would, I think the Big Ten would try and make sure that everybody was as equal as possible. It's really one of the philosophies that permeates the conference in many ways. With equal distribution of bowl revenue and equal distribution of NCAA tournament revenue and equal distribution of television revenue and all those kinds of things. So equality is in many respects the watchword, and so trying to get some of that spring practice back, if we could, would be optimal. At the same time, this may just be a season where there are some suboptimal things that have to happen. And I think that it's likely that if we played, that if we had 12 teams of the 14 that were able to play, we would go with a 12-team schedule. If we had, if it was 50-50, I think it becomes a harder question. But if most of the league can go, then I think we go and figure out how to make that work. And at the end of the day, in the way that we equally split television and other revenue, even if a school couldn't go, the benefit of the other 12 going would have very direct financial benefit to the other 2. So as painful as that would be, and I think it's something that we do as a last resort, I do think it is an option on the table.
Next question for Bill.
Yeah, Mary.
Will you be evaluating each of the sports on a case-by-case basis, or is football going to set the precedent? Meaning, if football doesn't play, does that trickle down to women's basketball, men's basketball,
No, I think that, the sports are very different. So you could imagine a scenario where men's and women's golf, for example, would be fairly easy to maintain social distancing, maintain separation, and to engage in a fairly safe way. Although you use the same tennis balls, you could imagine that when people play tennis, they're at a fair distance apart, and that could probably be done safely. So I think on the other hand, the other end of the spectrum, there is no social distancing in wrestling. There just isn't. So I think we would evaluate them on a sport by sport basis. Some are much easier to compete in than others in the context of the current set of rules. It's my hope that if we have, as we've talked about earlier, more extensive testing, then that will give us greater flexibility if that comes to pass. But yeah, I think we'll look at them over the course of the year individually.
Bill, the Big Ten on many fronts for many years they've sort of started social trends. They've pushed the rock a little bit, the envelope. So just recently it was announced that the Big Ten has put together a group to talk about mental health. And I think you mentioned Izzo going a little stir crazy, and Jill and all of us. There's these A personalities, these young people that would like to do something. So how does that fit into the help for the student athletes?
Well, it's something that I think, on college campuses today, if you polled the students, if you polled the faculty, and you ask what's your maybe 8 weeks ago, without blending in the circumstances of the last couple months, if you asked people what their number one concern was, number one issue, mental health would be very near the top of that list for many, if not most people. And our mental health providers and the number of people that have sought help across the university, across our 50,000 students, not just student athletes, has really risen dramatically over the last number of years. And I won't sort of get into my perspective on the whys and wherefores of that, because that could turn a 3-minute answer into an hour answer. But there's a lot of concern about mental health within the community of college students. And so in terms of athletics, we've been working very, very hard to make sure that our student athletes have access to mental health providers, both in terms of performance-based mental health to get folks ready to participate in their athletic activity and their sport, but also mental health that that might be thought of as more traditional in terms of people dealing with depression. For many of our female athletes, for some of our female athletes, eating disorders, but depression is a big one, and so we've been working pretty hard on that to grow our number of providers. Kevin Warren, our new commissioner, is quite passionate about this issue, and so one of the things that he's done is establish a commission that represents each university, and is spending a lot of time thinking through how we can work to provide our student athletes with the best care available. Interestingly, one of the things that the conference rolled out this week, and the conference is paying for it at their expense, is an app that's called, I think I jotted it down here. It's called Calm, CALM, and that's being made available to every student athlete, every full-time employee of a Big Ten athletic department. I'm not really a tech guy to speak of, but and it may seem weird that mental health services could in part be provided over an app over your phone, but it's something that many of our students are very excited about. And our student athlete advisory council, as sort of the student government group of our student athletes, was very pleased to see this and quite excited. And so I think though my reaction was kind of scratching my head, because that just sort of felt to my older person a little sort of unique. For our young people, that was really very well received as an opportunity to it doesn't always have to be a face-to-face visit with a person. You can there are things you can do via an app to support people. So that's kind of a neat addition to our repertoire of things, but something we're pretty passionately concerned about and working on every day.
So, more questions for Bill.
We have
Go
a
ahead,
question
Thomas.
from Diana. We have a question
Yes.
from Diana.
Are we unmuted?
Yeah, we're muted.
Okay, we have a question regarding revenues for football. And it has to do, have you thought about the possibility of having the games on a pay-per-view situation? Maybe that would be across the whole conference, or maybe several conferences would be getting to think about that idea. But I think fans in general would like to still support it if we can't sit in the stadium. So I think that's something that you may have talked about, or I'd suggest you do talk about.
Yeah, Marty, that's an interesting idea. I think that what we'd really like to do is there's a balancing act there, because on the one hand, as a public university, we want to at some base level give access to that to people at no cost, other than suffering through a lot of Chevy commercials and beer commercials. But at the same time, there will be ample opportunity for people to support Spartan football and the program, and it's going to be an interesting couple of years, because depending on what happens with football, as I've explained, obviously a huge revenue source for us. And when you think about as I think probably most of you know, maybe members of the public wouldn't be quite as aware, but I think as most of you know, our athletic budget is really 100% separate from the university's budget. So, we spend the revenue we generate without any any resource provided by tuition or state appropriation or other university resources. But at the same time, when you look at the very challenging circumstances in Michigan right now and the unemployment levels, and you think about how that's going to impact the state income tax, the state sales tax, even things like the gas tax, with a very limited consumption and unemployment, the state's revenue conference, I think, is scheduled for May 15th, if I've got the date right. But we expect that the university overall could see, as much as a 20% budget reduction, and that's on a $300 million state appropriation. So the good news is that we have a $300 million appropriation from the state on about a $3 billion budget. So it's just a little over 10%. The bad news is that $60 million is $60 million, no matter how you slice it. So the university is going to be very challenged, and so we're part of the university. I mean, we're part of the team, so we're all in this together and working to sort it out together. But I do think it will be a very, very challenging time for higher education over the next number of years, and for athletics, which is largely driven by football. But we're going to have to tighten our belts some, and we'll be talking about that in the coming weeks with our team. And so I appreciate any revenue ideas that are out there. Happy to accept suggestions.
Bill, by the way, we talked about Izzo going crazy, and we've seen videos of him redoing his garage. What do you do? I mean, you're kind of stuck. Read books? What do you do?
Well, actually, I'm actually, I think, spending more time here in my home office on calls like this, and working through issues with email, strategizing about our budget. Our new fiscal year starts July 1, so we're redoing much of our budget. So I find myself mostly working, to be completely honest. But I will say it has been nice as the weather's broken to get out and take a walk every now and again. And I am trying to read more. Something I've always enjoyed, and I'm a list maker, and it drives my wife a little nuts. But I was telling her the other day that I came across a Washington Post article on the best biography written about every president. And so I printed it off, and I said, well, there's another 44 good books to read. So so I discovered that I'd read 3 or 4 of them already, but I'm in the middle of, I think it's Joe Ellis, American Sphinx, about Thomas Jefferson. And I'm also, and then I have a different book that I listen to when I walk. And so I'm listening to a book, Broken Glass. I'm not sure, can't remember the author. That's a sort of a biography of the Farnsworth House in Plano, Illinois. I'm kind of a modern architecture junkie, and huge fan of Frank Lloyd Wright and Mies van der Rohe, and so this is a great book on Mies van der Rohe and the construction of the Farnsworth House for those that are interested in modern architecture. But yeah, so trying to do some more reading, some more walking. Those of you that know me know that I could use a little more walking, so that's probably a good thing. But yeah, mostly working.
Okay, next question. Byron, are you there?
Any comments, Bill, about paying players and how that will work out and what a mess it'll create?
Yeah, there are. Oh goodness. I'm
sorry to wait this long to do this.
No, that's a great question. There are two NCAA, or sort of two percolating issues, I'd say, that and again, I'm probably on the spectrum of athletic directors generally, and Big Ten athletic directors more specifically. I probably run on the as it relates to how college athletics ought to operate on the more conservative end of that scale, meaning somewhat resistant to these, or in some cases quite resistant to these issues. I have no problem with people earning a good income and having that opportunity. I just don't see it see a college football field as the place for that to happen. I mean, to me, amateur athletics is amateur athletics, and I posed this question to my staff. I said, if we took all the football players at Central Michigan and Western Michigan, and we put them all in Michigan and Michigan State gear, and we trooped them out on the field, and nobody knew who they were, would fewer people come to the game? And I'm not convinced that the diminution in skill level would cause lower attendance. You know, people are passionate about athletics, and and when you watch Cassius Winston make an incredible three-pointer with some guy in his face, or watching some of the catches that that Felton Davis made the other year, with one hand up in the air and his toe on the line. I mean, they are incredible. But I think college athletics is about supporting your team and watching some great sports in the context of people being students first. And maybe I'm just sort of way old school about that, but I do think they're students first in whether it's a health issue or an academic issue. We need to remember that. So the two issues are, one is the transfer rules and allowing students to transfer at least one time without sitting a year, and that's maybe the less controversial of the two issues. I fall in the camp, and I was outvoted on this 12-2 in the Big Ten. The AD at Penn State and I were on the other side of this coin, but the ADs voted to support the NCAA allowing students to transfer once without sitting, and in my mind, you don't have freshman athletes who have a good year by and large. Everybody has a miserable freshman year. They were the star of their high school, and then some. They were the star of their state, and they show up and they're riding the bench, and there are people better than them, and it's sorry about that. And it's tough, but so I'm really opposed to that, but I think it will come to pass probably next year. In terms of paying players, I think we'll largely push that off for a number of years, but in part you've got these name, image, and likeness rules, which aren't universities paying players, but they're players having the opportunity to earn income from other sources. And and there are times when I think that's probably okay. You take a kid who's a tennis player, and should he have the ability to teach tennis lessons at the local Y over the summer? I think things like that I don't think are beyond the pale. A normal student athlete or a normal student would have that ability. On the other hand, getting excited about having student athletes charge people for their autographs, have their name on jerseys that are for sale. Things like that to me are more of a struggle. And then you get into the sort of the proverbial recruiting issue, which is young man decides he's going to come and play basketball at Michigan State, and some say car dealer, for example, approaches him and says, "Hey, for $10,000 a year, I'll hire you to be the star of my commercials." And then next week the similarly situated person at Kentucky offers $15,000 a year, and the car dealer in Lincoln, Nebraska offers $20,000 a year. And do we get into essentially bidding wars for outside income for athletes? And I think it's a pretty troubling path. The NCAA is convinced it can control that. I'm a little less convinced, but I do think whatever rules they can create, they've talked about making sure that everybody has to report it, so it's at least public. And as one of my mentors taught me many years ago, most things are cured by sunshine. So that could help some, but it's something I really struggle with, and I guess there are times when you're happy that you're closer to the end of your career than the beginning, and when those conversations start to happen, that's kind of the feeling I get.
Bill, is it possible there's a middle ground there? There could be an addendum to this rule that where the guy can teach tennis, but he can't take an endorsement from anybody with a Nike swoosh.
Yeah, and they're working to. Yeah, there are working groups that are trying to sort of sort through this and get it more in that flavor of things. And I tend to. I mean, I think maybe it can get there initially, hopefully, but I worry a little bit about the slippery slope and how you sort of the foot in the door of the thing, and how it goes from there. To me personally, it's troubling, and so we'll see how it evolves.
Okay, next question. This is good stuff.
Hey, Bill, I have a question.
Sure.
This is Dennis. In relation to the paying the players and it turning into a recruiting advantage, has anybody thought of using like a pro sport salary cap? So, you could get every player on Ohio State, have a booster willing to pay him, $20,000. But if we treated it like pro sports and there was X amount of money to go across, you'd level the playing field.
Yeah, I don't know that in all the conversations that have occurred over the last couple of years, I've heard anybody think of that. An interesting idea. It's been more a tug of war between the extremes, but that would level the playing field at some level.
That would be interesting, wouldn't it, to see a salary cap on student endorsement money? How crazy is that?
Yeah, I struggle with it.
Okay, next question.
Hi, this is Jill again. I just have a comment that I'd like to make. Bill, first of all, thanks so much for the great job you did in getting Coach Tucker. And in relation to that, I've just been, I don't know if everybody else is following the recruiting, but I follow it quite closely, and he is doing just an amazing job recruiting under the circumstances. And I just read in the Lansing State Journal today about the quarterback they got from Texas, Faye, and it's an amazing story. So again, thank you for bringing him to Michigan State, and he's just doing a great job.
Well, Mel and I were talking. Well, thank you very much for that comment. Mel and I were talking the other day, and I was sort of apologizing because we brought him here, and then obviously due to no fault of ours really, within 4 or 6 weeks, whatever it was, we send him home, and he's not on campus, he's not interacting with anybody personally. It's just such a trying time for everybody, but let alone if you're a new guy, and your players don't know you that well. Your staff is, some of them have been with you, but others have not, and so you're trying to get to know your people over Zoom and things like that. And yet I told him that I've concluded that I think that that these challenging times have actually played to our advantage, because I think Mel has taken the challenge and has worked it harder than just about anybody else that I've been following. It's his presence on social media, his work with recruiting, and all of the we've had teams pulling together videos and doing a ton of graphics work that as I look across the Big Ten and what you see on Twitter and in social media, I think Mel has just been head and shoulders above others, and so. From my perspective, I think it's almost turned into an advantage for him, as hard as that would have been for me to say a month ago.
It was interesting when the rumors were firing around, Bill, that you had your man. We were on the road with basketball. So the game's over, and I always call home before we get on the airplane because you never know about airplanes. And so my wife goes, we're here and we got a coach. I go, you know what? We're hearing the same thing, but I don't know. Okay, so we land, we get in the bus, we're in the Breslin Tunnel. It's 2 a.m., the door opens, and there's Bill Beekman. So I went, he wanted to talk to Tom, obviously. So as soon as I got off the bus, I called home and I said, I think we got a football coach. So
Yeah.
It was pretty early in the morning when you met us.
It was. I want to say it was maybe 2 o'clock-ish, something like that. Yeah. We so I'm not happily I've forgotten some of that week, but yeah, it was an 8-day process, and I really had completely ignored social media. I had ignored regular media. I just had my nose to the grindstone working on the project. And but I knew I was getting some negative press when I had like high school friends or college friends texting me, "Gee, are you okay? Is everything okay?" And I was doing just fine. We had a very small team, but Tom was part of that team, and because he was in the air when everything got done, I wanted to be the first one to tell him. But that day, when you all were on the road, we had, I think you were in Illinois, if I recall. We were negotiating all day long, and in many of these coaches these days have agents. So we were negotiating with Mel's agent, and we had our lawyer in the room, and our personnel person, and my leadership team, and back and forth on various issues and things. And I think it was, if I recall, it was 1:05 in the morning here in East Lansing, and it would have been 11:05 in Denver when Mel and I finally spoke on the phone and talked about how excited we both were to have him come on board. And so it was, I think, about 1:05 in the morning. Within 30 seconds of our conversation, we had the first media report that Mel was coming, and then we worked hard to get some help from our friends to get an aircraft to get him here. And remember, this is 1:05 Michigan time, and I believe we had him on the ground at the airport in Lansing by 3 o'clock, roughly. So I left. Me and our search consultant left our offices at 1855 at about 2 o'clock and went over to wait in the tunnel for the bus to come in, and greeted the team and shared the good news with Tom. And then we discovered that we hadn't eaten since about noon. So we went over to Bell's Pizza, which was still open. And now it's about 2:30 in the morning, and we're sitting there having a slice of pizza. But it was a very happy slice of pizza at 2:30 in the morning.
Oh, yeah. Next question.
Hey, Bill, Tom and I were here from down in Florida. Assuming students are back on campus in the fall, is the decision of what sports will be played, is that going to be done at the conference level, or is that going to be done at the university level, or is it going to be done at the NCAA level, not only for football, but for a lot of the other sports as well?
I think it'll be done, I would say, mostly at the university level and at the conference level. So we will, I think every university is going to have to make its own decision in the context of, and actually, I think some of it will be done, some of the boundaries will be created by the governors of the various states. If you recall, for the NCAA basketball tournament, the first weekend, or the Wednesday night games, were scheduled in Dayton, as they always are, and the governor of Ohio said, well, they could play, but they weren't going to have fans in the stands. And so the governors can have a very significant impact on at least where the games are played and who is in the stadium. But no, I think those decisions will largely be a campus by campus decision based on how your campus is able to welcome back students and student athletes, and whether it's safe for students to come to your campus. So I think first and foremost, it's a university decision. and then layering on top of that the conference, and the conference will coordinate our schedule. The scheduling really runs through the conference. So in that regard, the conference has to be a big part of the conversation as well.
It's crazy times. Next question. Tom, do you have a question? See, Tom McCall's looking in. You got to have some kind of question.
Sure. I was wondering how big of the financial impact of missing the NCAA tournament and the Big Ten tournament already has on the budget.
Oh, that's a very interesting question. So the way the NCAA tournament has historically worked, you get a sort of a point for each game you play in the tournament. And so what the Big Ten historically had done was added up all of its points, and then you get that money from the NCAA, and then you divide that money by 14. So if Michigan State plays in 4 games, and Northwestern's maybe not the best example. Maryland plays in 1 game, then they all get the same amount. And what the NCAA had done was they would give you 1/6 of that amount each year. So the amount we got last year was 1/6 of the amount we would have gotten that year, and 1/6 from 2 years ago, and 1/6 from 3 years ago, and so on. And so it sort of cascades. And so it's not an immediate payment, but it's a 6-year scale. So if it would have worked according to normal, we would have still gotten 5/6 of what we should have gotten. And that 1 year would have sort of cascaded over the next 6 years. And so we would have taken a slight dip over the 6 years, but not a massive cut. But what the NCAA decided to do is sort of rewrite their distribution rules for this year. And I understand it. What they did was create a distribution model that largely favored sort of the mid-majors and smaller schools. And in part, that decision was based on the fact that those schools have so much of their athletic department budgets that ride on that money, far more than a Big Ten school would typically have. So we took I'm going to blank on the number off the top of my head, but ballpark $2 million hit this year because of that reconfiguration of the money. And so hopefully the good news is that next year it'll be back to normal. But it was a one-time hit of maybe it was $2.5 million, but in that range.
Can you imagine, Bill, what it might have been? They were saying the Big Ten could have 11 teams, and let's say a handful get to the second weekend. I mean, when you start adding up points, the Big Ten could have had a bunch of them.
Yes, and there's actually a really interesting article out there somewhere that takes the last 20 years and the total points accumulated by each Big Ten team and how much revenue that has brought to the conference. And when you do that for football and you look at bowls, then you see, Ohio State is a leader. When you do that configuration for basketball, it's Michigan State that's really brought the most revenue to the conference. And and on the one hand, it's good that we have this model of equality where we share it across the board. But given our last 20 years of basketball, we've gotten the short end of the stick in that distribution, which is a good thing.
By the way, anybody have any good haircut stories since none of the barbershops are open? And Ron, you can't say anything.
I was going to comment on Bill's beard. I can't believe we've gone almost an hour and a half and no one's made a comment. I like it, but I did have a quick question here. And obviously, with a lot of the uncertainty and challenging times, is there anything we can do as great Spartans to help out during this period?
Well, thanks for asking that question, Ron. And first I'll comment on my beard, which is sort of, it's like hockey players have their when they're in the race for the cup, they have their playoff beards. And so this is my pandemic beard, and it was sort of a novel experiment for a number of weeks, and now it's just sort of annoying. So I think it'll be going hopefully the path of the pandemic soon. But no, I really appreciate you asking that question. And the next the next couple of years as we sort through this have the real possibility of being pretty trying, and hopefully we'll have a football season if we can do it in a way that's safe for everybody. But we just don't know what it's going to bring. So I would just first of all, I appreciate everything that so many of you have done, and I sort of look at my screen and see just extraordinary generosity to MSU athletics. So first of all, thank you very much for everything you've done for us, and in addition to the resources that you've helped provide, just the support that everybody provides. It's great to see so many of you that come to away football games, that I see at the Big Ten basketball tournament or the NCAA tournament or all of those things that are there for our AD lunches, and just support MSU and our student athletes and our coaches, and support them with a kind word or a sense of encouragement. And so I wouldn't, I guess, identify anything specific other than I just very much appreciate everything that you all do, and we'll need that support more than ever as we go through the next couple of seasons. And I have every confidence that our Spartan family will pull together with our Spartans will attitude. We will, I think, much like Mel has, we will find a way into lemonade from some of these lemons, and make the absolute best of it, and hopefully leapfrog some folks that aren't as creative, aren't as diligent, and don't have the elbow grease that we bring to this. So thank you for the question, and it's a way for me to say thank you very much for all you do for us, and across the spectrum of activities, and we very much appreciate it.
Well, Bill, before we wrap this up, man, you've been answering some really good questions here. Anything you want to add to this?
No, I just so much appreciate everybody taking the time. I feel bad because we sort of do this over the dinner hour, and one of the things that I do with our student athletes is we periodically get together. We try and do it twice a month when things are normal. But we have a breakfast with Bill, and I buy them all breakfast. And we had a breakfast with Bill the other week, and I was telling him I feel bad because here we are and none of us are having breakfast. And so I wish I could buy you all dinner. But thank you very much for joining the conversation, for taking the time, and for your commitment to MSU athletics. We're very excited for the future. Not just in football and basketball, but I think we'll bring home a Big Ten championship in hockey before too long, and women's golf, and our wrestling team is just getting better and better. And some of you probably remember those glory days of the 50s, 60s, and 70s where we were a national power, and I'm hopeful that we get back there soon. So good things on the horizon, and very much appreciate everybody being part of the team.
Well, thanks to everybody for joining. It's fun to see faces that I haven't been able to see for a while, and that's kind of a neat thing because you miss people. And Sue, it's good seeing you, by the way. So anyway, well, thanks everybody, Bill. So it's up to you to wrap her up.
All right. Well, Will, I think that in the tradition of MSU basketball, I think what we need to close this up is a "He Got It" from Will Tieman.
I'm a little rusty, but I'll try. You ready?
I'm ready.
You got it.
There we go. Go green and have a great evening, everyone. Thanks so much.
Go white. Thank you.